Did the gaps that I talk about from December 26th through the 29th close? Hi everyone, it's Dow on the Dow. Today is Saturday, December 30th. I thought I would take a look at the gap trades and also show you the price targets for Tuesday. First up is NNDM. When I talked about it last week, price was at $2.40. And this gap starting at 245, closing at 246. Another one at 249, closing out at 252 were in play. I will extend this out and see where it touched. Let me move that out of the way. It's this green line I want to grab, and it touched right there. So this gap is no longer viable. It's done. This gap, I'll move that out of the way so you can see, touch to the upside right there. So that gap is also done. Note price ran all the way up to almost 4 standard deviations and resistance. What happens at resistance? People take their profits and they run, and you can expect price to fall as people get out, and that's exactly what happened, almost down to support here. And now we are at 240 again, where we started. So this is right here on the line. To the north side from where we are takes us back to the middle of the trend and resistance at roughly 243. Above that at 2 standard deviations and another level of resistance and a potential take profit area, 248, 251, and roughly 254. If we hit this line, or this line, I will anticipate a sell-off as people take their profits. Now, the next one I want to go over is, actually, let me go ahead and just delete these price in targets there. And you can see that we're done. And let me clean this up and move it back to the 26th right there. Next one is NEO. When I talked about NEO, price was at $8.42. I was tracking this gap and this gap as well. And clearly we had a run up. So this gap touched actually on Tuesday, but I will move this line out of the way so you can see it touched right there. So this gap is no longer in play. Now this gap is still viable, still in play. It has not closed to the upside. It almost touched right there at 962, but did not. So I will continue to track this gap. And I will put that in my next gap trades video. This is a price target at 1080. I'm not sure if it changed. It's been revised downward. So always check this so you know what the target is, what your target is. Now we have a couple of gaps that I want to also talk about to the downside. This one closed out. I'll just delete it so it doesn't get confusing. When I leave the price, sometimes it makes the chart look really messy, but this gap is still in play. You'll want to flip it to the other time frames to see other gaps either to the north side or to the south side. So that one is still in play. I will continue to track that. And if that does complete and it takes us down to $7.43 to the south side. But we are not in that channel, not in that zone, not even close, just something to be aware of. I'll probably I will stop tracking it until we get closer. But this one is in reach. I'll just delete that right now as well. And as you can see, when price was down here, this is the support area. And you can always anticipate price to get back to the middle of the trend. This is where price wants to go before it either goes to the north side or to the south side. So from here to here, you can take a trade and get out. But fortunately, it did go up, but it fell back down again to support. And what happens at support? People buy, and the price starts to go up to resistance. All right. So your targets will be for Tuesday back to the middle of the trend and a potential take profit area at 921, 951, that gap that I talked about at 962, 963, and 982. This gap to the north side to close it out is not in the zone, not in the channel that I am tracking right now. So I don't think it will close just yet. It's got a ways to go. Fingers crossed. The next one is SoFi. Price was at $9.71. It went up all the way to resistance and a sell-off again at support. But the gap to the north side has not closed. I tracked it earlier in the week as well, but this gap is still in play. I'll just delete that, clean up my charts. The gap here to the south side is still in play, and this one is also still in play. So that would take us down to roughly 896. We are not in that channel, not in that zone, something to just be aware of. I'll stop tracking it, but basically I'll be tracking this one. And here are your price targets for Tuesday. We are at 995, the middle of the trend, and the baseline 1015, and resistance and a potential take profit area. Another take profit area, possibly 1049, 1067, 1084, and then that gap I was telling you about. The next one, WMB, I am in this one. I own this one, SoFi, NEO, and NNDM. All right, I've tracked this for a couple of weeks now. Let me just show you right here. When I talked about the stock, it was at $35.14. I am down, but we did go up to resistance. This would have been a take profit area. I could have done that, but I just decided to write it out. And then what happens at resistance? Fell down. All right, the gap that I was tracking is right here. It did not close out, so I will continue to track it for the following week. And for your price targets, we are past, the middle of the trend. We are right here on our way to 2 standard deviations. Very close. 34.86, 34.91, and 34.96. Back to the middle of the trend. 34.76, 34.66, 34.61, and another level of support and a potential buy-in area, 34.55. Note the multiple times I could have gotten out. I'm playing this gap here, so I'm going to be in this much longer, but I could have sold up here also for 35.20. This is resistance, resistance up here, take profit area here. Down here, -2, -3, or -4 is support. This is a potential buy-in area, buy-in, 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 buy-in. And if you're playing it a little risky, you could play it up to here, take it, take the trade, take the trade. It just depends on what it is, but I do like it to touch this line before I get in. Oh, and this gap to the south side, let me move this out of the way, has not, oh yes, I'm sorry, it did touch right there. So this gap is no longer in play to the south side. That's good. One less gap we have to track. But knowing that this gapped up, what goes up must come down. It filled right here. So I know that price will eventually get to here. So if I bought in up here, I know that it's going to crack here. So it did. And then what happens? Bounce at support. The next one is MO. Did the gap close? And it did not. I tracked it here at $40.36. Ignore the horizontal lines. Those are previous support and resistance. So this will get carried over. This gap is still in play. Here are your targets for Tuesday, since Monday is a holiday. Basically, we are at 2 standard deviations in a take profit area. 40.43, 40.50 to the south side. 40.20, 40.04, 39.96, and 39.88. The next one, SLB. Option R helps me reset it if you, excuse me, don't know the quick keys. All right. So when I talked about this stock, it's just going straight down. The channel does not look good. It was at $53.08. We did hit resistance here, and then a slow decline. So this gap, I did talk about this in my gap trades video, and we still did not hit it then, and I will extend it to next week's trade. So this gap closes out at 56.39. We are not in this channel, not in the zone, very far off at this point. This gap did close to the downside. I anticipated that closure, all right, and it touched right here. So this gap is no longer a threat. The landmine is gone. Now, your targets. We are close to 3 standard deviations. I'm going to flip this over to the 15-minute and give you a different price target. So the middle of the trend on the 15 takes us to 53.41. That gap I told you about would be basically at 2 standard deviations on the 15, and then closes out at the 3 standard deviations basically. So 4 standard deviations takes us to 57.20. And then, to the south side, 51.55, 50.56, and 49.64. Note this gap to the south side, that will take us out at roughly 49.18. Back to the 5-minute time frame. The different time frames give you different buy and sell signals and gives you a bigger picture, a big picture look. So flip it on the daily, the weekly, the monthly, and you can see where we are and if it's going to be an investment for you, a day trade, swing trade. So that takes us to 52.23 at 4 standard deviations there, and at -2, 51.37, 51.22, and 51.09. The next one is BABA. I do own BABA as well. We ended the day there at 77.51. Note the upward channel, so that's good on the 5-minute. When I talked about this stock, it was at $75.28. We went up here, and this is resistance. What happens? People took their profits and they ran. But this gap that I talked about, I will move this white line over so you can see better. So this is the gap I was tracking, and it touched right there. So that gap is no longer in play. This was carried over from the previous week. 76.72, that one right there. I will delete that. All right. The next target that I was tracking was at $76.78. There were multiple gaps in this one. It was a hot mess. Closed out at $77.43. So we did touch at $76.78. I will extend this, and then we touched right here. So that gap is no longer in play. Done. Pulled this price up. So I was expecting price to go up because this gap was in the realm of the -2 and 2 standard deviations. All right, the next gap that I was tracking started at 77.69, closed out at 78.46. So this gap touched right here. It has not closed out. So the good news is we have some upside potential for next week. So I expect that to close out again at 78.46. All right. And to the south side, this gap did not close. So unfortunately, we've got some pain also in store for us. This takes us down to 75.32. It started at 75.95. This gap is also within reach. All right, this starts at $77, closes out at $76.13. And then this ugly one here also is still in play. What about this one that I've been tracking? Yep, this one still in play as well. Some nasty gaps to the south side for us, but not in the channel, not in the zone. We're not there, just something to be aware of. This one is the one that I will be keeping my eyes on. As a matter of fact, let me mark it out. All right, here are your targets for Tuesday. Back to the middle of the trend. That's an easy target, 77.62. This gap that I mentioned there, and then closes out at 78.46 again. 78.60, 79.07, 79.55. If we hit this area, I will anticipate price to fall as people lock in their profits. Next one, Starbucks. I'm in this trade for my mom. I bought at different intervals, $75, $80, and $95, I believe, are the different price points I have. All right. When I talked about it, price was at $95.28. I want to thank Murat for also pointing out the fact that at that time, the RSI was at 36 and price was below the SMA at the 20, the 50, and the 200. So thank you for letting me know that. I appreciate it. I didn't get a chance to say anything earlier because I forgot, and now I'm redoing this video, so I thought I'd make a mention of it. All right. So price did. I'm going to move this for a second because this gap is still in play. So the price fell down, went sideways at support though from where we are, so that's expected, and then a bounce off support and resistance and a take profit area, and then it sold off to support again, back up through resistance, clear a sell area here, back down to support and a sell area, and a bounce to the upside as people bought the dip. And again, price tends to grind along this baseline, whether it's along this line, and the line could be going down also. So wherever it is, it's going to grind along there before it makes its way up or to the south side. All right, so this gap was the gap that I was tracking. I will move this over to Tuesday. Right there. All right, this gap is still in play. That will take us out to 97.64. All right, note this gap closed to the south side as well at that time. The channel changes. Fortunately, we don't have to compute that. The computer does. All right. Here are your targets. We are at 96.01 to the north side at resistance and a take profit area, 96.34, 96.57. That gap closes out there again at 97.64. Getting close, but this could take a while because we're not at this level yet. And obviously flip it to the other channels to get a big picture view of what's happening. The next one I want to go over is Oracle. Did the gap close? Again, two things I'm going to go over. Did the gap close and what are the targets for Tuesday? So the gap that I was tracking to the upside takes us to 114.90. Oops, that is the wrong thing I pulled over. It's this green bar I want to grab. So this gap clearly did not close. Lots of trades to the upside and to the downside before we get there, but it's still there, and I wanted to point it out to the upside. And then this gap, this little bugger here, will take us down, still in play, to 104.29. I talked about it for my gap video from the 18th to the 22nd as well. Note the sell-off, bounce to support, and the sell-off after that. But here are your targets for the following week. 106.30, 106.70, and 107.07. And then that gap all the way there. But we started to touch it, see? It started at 104.89. And every time we got on that line, it did bounce up, so that's good. I just need this gap to close out, so that's one less gap we have to worry about, one less gap that's going to drag us down. All right, price targets. 105.55, 106.31, 106.67, 107.06. 104.76, that gap begins at 104.70, -3 standard deviations, another potential buy-in area, 104.39, that gap closes, and finally 104. I don't anticipate it to get to 104 in one day. The next one, did the gap on Nike close? Unfortunately, it did not, but we did go up a little. The channel, at least on the 5-minute, is not going down. It's still an upward slope. Note this gap closed, this gap closed. Ignore the horizontal lines. All right, here are your targets. 108.57, the middle of the trend to the north side. 109.78, that gap began. The gap began at 110.15. It we almost touched that area, but note the sell-off at resistance. All right, we're going to make another attempt next week. 110.37, 110.97. The price dropped last week. There was some bad news, and the earnings, the surprise number is down, but reported 13.388 billion, estimate 13.39. So we didn't quite make the estimate. All right, so it tanked. dropped, people took their profits up here, back to the middle of the trend, support, bounce off. You know how this works. All right, targets to the south side. Did I do the targets already? Now I got distracted. But anyway, okay, to the south side, 106.22 at negative 4, 106.87, 107.44. Sorry if I already just said that, but now I've lost track. 108.53, sort of close enough there. But that potential gap all the way to 122.40. Fingers crossed, but that's a long ways off. You got a lot of pain to get through to get to the upside. Lowe's is next. Did the gap close? It did not. I will extend this gap over. It will close out at 255.33. It did touch. It started at 223.22, but couldn't get there. But sold off, notice, and all the way back down to support. All right, here are your targets. 222.99, 223.43, 223.88. Back to the middle of the trend where it will hit 222.09, 221.21, 220.77, 220.30. Next one is CrowdStrike. When I talked about it, price was at 255.63. Look at, we hit resistance. Okay, this gap that I talked about closed. It started, well, I already extended it because I looked at it, but basically I talked about it here. And all you do is carry it over, and it touched right there. So we are done with this to the north side. So if you were down here, I anticipated it go to the middle of the trend, and it did. All right, so I will no longer be tracking that one. That's off my list, as well as NNDM. Here are your targets: 256.82, 257.63, 258.52, 255.09, 253.35, 252.55, 251.74. The last one is NVIDIA. We almost closed the gap that I was talking about. And last week, I guess I got rid of... Let me move this so I could see. So this gap is still in play. And when I talked about this last week on the 22nd, what was the price? Oh, this was from the previous December 26th. Oh, I got it. Whoops. Command C. All right. Wait, what date? All right, let me just move this back. I'll figure this out later and redo this chart. But when I talked about this, let me move this back to the 26th. There. All right. I talked about this gap at 497, closes out at $500.82. And we couldn't quite hit it here. So this gap is still in play for NVIDIA. All right, I will continue to track it. And this gap to the south side is also in play. That will take us down to, unfortunately, $483.87. So here are your targets for Tuesday. Back to the middle of the trend, 495.98. This gap, 497, 530 cents, $500.82, 502.39, and 504.54. 491.71, 489.58. This gap starts at 487.68, and at -4 standard deviations, 487.43. That gap closes out at 483.87. And that is your gap recap for the week of December 26th through the 29th. That's Tuesday through Friday. And I will continue to track the gaps that I talked about from this period to the next cycle. So I will remove CrowdStrike and NNDM and find 2 more gap trades for you. And this time I'll try to find something that is in the range of -2 and 2 standard deviations where it's an easier target to hit. That does it for me. Thank you so much for watching.